Good morning, everyone. I'm Rachel Banks, the Head of Change for People and Culture at AMP. There's some seats down to the front. Those of you at the back that might not have a seat yet, please come and join us up the front. We won't bite. Welcome to today, which is the fourth of the Amplify Festival Days. It's great to see so many visitors to AMP, our board members, AMP staff, members of the media, and of course those people joining us through our live stream. I am your host today for today's session with Stephanie Preston, Rethinking Human Behaviour, Evolutionary Neuroscience and the Interface Between Emotion and Decision-making. Please use social media and the Amplify Festival app today to post ideas, comments and questions using the hashtag AmplifyFest. In my work, it fascinates me the more we learn about human behaviour, the more we realise much is linked to our evolution as a species and the hardwiring of the brain. But as we learn more about the brain and the patterns, we also learn how we can adapt behaviour and rewire our neural pathways. It's a fascinating space of research for us, and I look forward to understanding more through Stephanie's talk today. Bain are our partners for today's discussion, and I'd like to introduce Richard Hatherall, the head of Bain's Asia Pacific Customer Strategy and Marketing Practice, to give you some more background on Stephanie. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Rachel. Bain & Company is honoured to be associated with Amplify. The organisation and the calibre of the speakers is truly world-class. As a leading global management consultancy, at Bain we differentiate ourselves on our ability to generate cutting-edge insights and drive results for our clients. The Amplify theme of innovation is one that resonates with us, as many of the companies we work with and the industries we work in are in need of reinventing themselves to achieve their long-term growth objectives. As a head of Bain's customer strategy and marketing practice in Asia Pacific, I've dedicated my career to helping companies figure out what it will take for them to be loved by their customers in order to ultimately deliver differential financial returns. I've observed time and time again the linkages between the day-to-day behaviours and decision effectiveness of an organisation and a company's ability to attract, retain and delight customers and grow their business. Which brings me to our first speaker this morning. It's with great pleasure I'd like to introduce Dr. Preston. Dr. Preston has a PhD in Behavioural Neuroscience from the University of California and is currently an Associate Professor of Psychology and the head of the Ecological Neuroscience Lab at the University of Michigan. Dr. Preston has brought together learnings from the fields of cognition, evolution, social behaviour and neuroscience to shine a light on the connection between emotion and decision-making in our homes and in our marketplaces. Dr. Preston's works have been published and recognised in multiple forms, and her insights have changed the way several multinational brands approach design and innovation and allocate their resources. I've been particularly impressed by Dr. Preston's contributions to the science of consumption, where she and her colleagues unpick such modern phenomena as obesity, financial bubbles, and shopping sprees. We are very privileged to have Dr. Preston with us today and to have the opportunity to hear her addresses on the topic of evolutionary neuroscience and the interface between emotion and decision-making. I'm sure those of us who take an interest in human behaviour, whether looking to customer hearts and minds, motivating employees, or encouraging better decision effectiveness within our organisations, will have much to take away. On that note, please help me in welcoming Dr. Stephanie Preston.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is the first time I've ever been to Australia. I've never been further in the Pacific Ocean than Hawaii, and I was a little scared, actually. It's a long time to be on a flight, but I actually had an amazing, wonderful flight. It was very restful. I didn't have any jet lag. It's so beautiful. I walked around all the parks and shopping, and I really had like a great time. And that's not even to mention the great talks I've been to and the colleagues I've met here. So thank you so much. I'm going to tell you today about my research and the research of colleagues that creates an overarching view of the field as people in neuroscience see it. Just some acknowledgements. There's many people that participate on any one experiment, many sources of funding that we use to do our work. So as he mentioned, I'm in charge of a society we call the Interdisciplinary Science of Consumption. And sort of like Amplify, we have an every other year conference. And we bring together people from all different fields in order to figure out what the underlying science is on multiple aspects of consumer and consumptive behavior. So we have this book that is, many of the speakers from our meetings contributed chapters to it. And as he said, we have economists, marketers, clinical scientists, neuroscientists, psychologists, evolutionary psychologists, all discussing the ways in which there's commonalities in the way we process different types of rewards, including money, drugs of addiction, food, and material items. So there's this underlying neural system that we examine the degree to which it underlies all of these phenomena at some similar level. And you can buy it at Amazon.com. Unfortunately, the copies that are on the table there are fresh out already, but it is available for purchase online. So as I mentioned, we're interested in the degree to which ancient neural systems that have been in place at least since the mammalian order came to be, since humans were rodents, not just monkeys or apes or primates, but long ago when the mammalian order evolved at the very end of the dinosaur period, 200 million years ago. Many of these same brain systems, in the rat brain you have literally the same brain areas as you have in the human brain. It's much smaller, it's only about this big. But if you get a microscope, you can see all the exact same areas, and they're wired in largely the same ways as they are in the human brain. The human brain is just bigger, right? Just like an elephant brain is a lot bigger than a person's brain, because we're bigger. But it has all the same circuits, and it's very easy to study behavior in the brain of an animal in the lab. So most of the research has been done on drugs of abuse and food rewards. And we know from research where you put humans in an fMRI scanner that the same brain areas are active in a human's brain when they see rewarding substances, chocolate, coffee, alcohol, sexual images. They light up the same brain areas as you would find subserve those behaviors in rodents. So this is what we're interested in. And a lot of the talk will focus on two particular brain areas that they speak of as the decision and reward circuit. Okay? In my field, we call it the mesolimbocortical circuit, but we're going to shorten it. We're going to call it the decision and reward areas. Okay? The nucleus accumbens is an ancient, tiny little area in the middle of your brain. I can't point at it because it's in the middle. Triangulate through there. And you can see it's lit up on the left side of the human brain there. It says NACC. So that's the nucleus accumbens, and that's sort of like the heart of this decision and reward area across species. And then it communicates actively with the middle of your frontal cortex. So they call it the medial frontal cortex. They sometimes call it the orbital frontal cortex because it's near your eyes. And sometimes they call it the ventromedial prefrontal cortex because that's at the bottom and the middle. Okay, so this area right here behind your eyes, very important. And it communicates actively with this nucleus accumbens in order to make decisions that are advantageous for you, but also strongly motivated towards rewards, seeking rewards. What about money? Rodents don't use money. I have to admit that. There is a lot of research showing that there is commonality. So many of the same brain areas, the nucleus accumbens, the orbitofrontal cortex, are used for decisions about money. But later I'll describe some differences. Money is a little different because it's what we call a secondary reward. So you can't eat it, right? You can't directly consume it. It doesn't have like a strong, powerful chemical response on your brain and body the way like a real drug would. But it can still end up having this effect because you've learned what it's good for. So in a classic example, in my fellowship, I worked in neurology at Iowa, and they have this classic task, the Iowa gambling task, and it's designed to dissociate this urge to approach rewards versus to inhibit and go for the slow reward. So there's two decks that are good ones and two decks that are bad ones. The good decks give you a little money at a time, but they only take away a little at a time. So anytime you hit the card, you could win or lose money, just like in gambling. And there's slow, steady earnings on the good deck. And if you stick with them, you'll end up with money at the end. But then there's 2 bad decks that give you a lot of money up front. But sometimes they wipe your entire account. Okay? Maybe you're familiar with this concept. So what we do is we don't tell them which deck is which. You just have to click on them, and you have around 100 trials to figure it out on your own. We don't even tell them there's good and bad decks. We just say, here's some decks. Your money will show up at the top. Your earnings and losings will show up at the top. And you accrue money over time, and you could lose money over time. And it's your job to figure out how to get money out of the game. Okay? So a typical person will hit on a good deck at some point and be like, whoa, that was an awesome payoff. Click, 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 and they just want to stay there, right? But eventually they hit one of those catastrophic losses. They lose everything they gained up to that point, and they're like, oh, I'm not so sure I like that one anymore. And then they eventually set on the better decks that have the slower earnings, and they win in the long run. That's what a typical person does. But you can find subjects that have brain damage specifically in this area that we talked about, in this orbital frontal area. And those patients, they felt the pain of losing money. So they have an intact amygdala. So if you have an intact amygdala, a normal person down here on the left side, when you get that first loss, you have a punishment response. Your palms sweat. Your heart races. Okay? So we actually measure the sweat response after every click of the deck. And you can tell if you have an intact amygdala, you feel the punishment. So these patients that have a hole where the amygdala should be, in this brain slide on the left corner, there's these 2 circles towards the bottom. Do you see the 2 dark circles? Those are just air. And that's supposed to be brain. Okay? So people with Urbach-Wiethe disease lose particularly the cells in that area. And so they're on the middle of the graph, and when they lose all their money, they're like, whatever. They don't have a sweat response. They don't feel particularly punished by it, right? So they can't make good decisions later because they never thought it was awful to lose all their money, right? So if you meet one of these patients, they're very happy-go-lucky. They rush into terrible situations. They have lots of ex-spouses. They can't hold down a job. They love hamburgers from McDonald's. And so they enjoy the rewards of things, but they really don't feel the punishment of loss. So you need that to respond. Whereas this they call the VMPFC because it's not constrained to that one little hole if you have frontal damage. It could be a wider area. But if you have a patient that has damage in this wider area, they felt the pain of loss. But then, the next trial, when they say, which deck should I choose? A typical person, when they're about to click on the bad deck, they get that nervousness in their stomach. Their palms sweat because their brain is remembering the punishment last time, right? This is like a classic kind of conditioned response. So they remember the pain, but when they go to pick it again, it doesn't come into their mind. They don't use the frontal cortex to reach back into the emotional memories of what happened before. So they go ahead and pick it again. So they're not incapable of feeling the pain. They're incapable of using it in the future to make a decision. Okay? So the ones that have damage in this red area on the brain, it's showing you in the left slide from the bottom view, they can't make advantageous decisions, even though they felt the pain, because they can't reflect on it later. And if you have a frontal patient in the lab, they're a little bit irascible, they are compulsive, they have really bad social skills. So they'll pat the nurse on the butt, steal your pen, they don't smile once, and then they're out of there, right? So they just have no sense of the way in which to predict how their behavior will influence others. So they just do whatever comes to mind minute by minute. This is a nice pen. That's a nice booty. Let's just... So they have trouble in real life. What I'm interested in is how these brain areas participate in the degree to which you want to accumulate resources. So if you're in finance or investment, you don't just want people to want money, you want them to accumulate the money. You want them to stockpile it for later, right? And again, from my evolutionary background, I think about rodents, right? Squirrels, they cache nuts all fall along, they create these stores, and then they eat the nuts in the winter when there isn't any. Kangaroo rats live in the desert. I don't know if they have them in Australia, but in the American desert, they have kangaroo rats that, because it's so dry, you don't have constant access to food. So when it rains, the few times a year it rains in the desert, the bushes grow seeds. They gather up all the seeds after a rain, and they hide them all over the desert. And then when it's dry and there's nothing to eat, they go back and find them. Okay? And just like the way people have a bank account or a mattress or a diversified stock portfolio, kangaroo rats can either cache seeds all over the place. So if somebody steals some, they only got a little, right? If there's a loss, it's minimally effective, it's minimally impactful to the animal because they have tons spread all over the place and you only found one. You didn't find them all at once, right? But that's costly because you have to remember where all this is. And they use the exact same brain area as people use to remember how to get to the beach. Where's your keys? What do I have to be at 3 p.m.? They use this same memory system in kangaroo rats as people do to remember where they put the seeds. And you can even show that in the lab. You can remove that brain area and then they can't do the task. But sometimes, if there's no danger, there's no risk, there's no predators, they are lazy and they just put all the seeds in their burrow. That's like the mattress, right? So they just hide them all in one spot. But there is a cost because if somebody happens upon their burrow, they lose all their seeds at once. Okay? So there's obviously this potentially analogous behavior in animals as there is in people with their money. So my job is to figure out, is it just sound like a good analogy or is it real? Is it a real what we call homology? So in biology, a homology means not only do you have an analogous behavior in two species, you have an analogous behavior because it evolved from the same common ancestor. Okay? So one species could do a behavior and the other one could do it over here, but it has nothing to do with their evolutionary history. It's just the sensible thing to do in that situation, and lots of species can discover the sensible thing given enough time. Right? But I want to know if it's a homology related to our shared ancestry as mammals. And there is, on the surface, evidence for this. So these same two brain areas, this medial frontal cortex and the nucleus accumbens deep in there, are necessary for rodents to hide their seeds. So if you remove one of these two brain areas in the lab, you put the food in the cage, and the animal will eat some. It's hungry, and it just leaves the pile there and goes back to rest. Whereas if it has those two brain areas, then it eats, it's full, the pile's still there, and it actively takes the food back to a hidden area. So it makes many trips to take any remaining food, even because it's already full, to hide it for later. Okay? But it needs those two brain areas to do it. And similarly, if you take those same frontal patients who are, being inappropriate, and you go to their house, there's a significant number of those patients who are hoarders. Do you know what a hoarder is? Okay. We definitely have this problem in America, and I think, our problems like to spread to other nations. And so they're more likely to be hoarders. So if you take all the patients at Iowa, they have a huge patient database registry, and you give them all questionnaires about their hoarding issues, or you give it to their spouse who knows them well. The overlap in the brain area is this red area you can see in A. The more you have damage in this area, the higher the probability you have a hoarding problem. And you can even get really weird specific deficits. So on the top right, there's a man who had frontal damage, and he suddenly had this impulsive need to steal people's cars. He wasn't like trying to sell them or anything. He just had like a compulsion. So he would like walk down the street, see a car he liked, get inside, drive away, leave it somewhere, and then do it again, a few hours later. So that's a very specific deficit you can get. And then this other person on the bottom right had frontal damage, and he had this specific drive to collect rubber bullets. I don't know why rubber bullets, but he would amass them, and he spent all his time finding these rubber bullets, which is not unlike visually a store of seeds you would see from a kangaroo rat. And similarly, you have some psychological motivations. So I postulated for my thesis research that the stress and anxiety of uncertainty or of being stolen from is what directly causes you to invest your energy in how you store. Okay? So we took these kangaroo rats. I trapped them myself in the desert. Thank you very much. There were snakes and tarantulas out there, and you have to go in the middle of the night because they're nocturnal. We brought them back to the lab, and then we created an arena where there's two individuals on separate sides of the arena. So they have like apartments. There's one guy's apartment, and it's adjacent to the next guy's apartment, but there's a screen in between so they can see and smell each other. But they can't normally access each other's side, right? So and they have a little jar, like the bedroom, off to the side, and that's like the burrow, okay? So if they're going to larder hoard, like the bank account or the mattress, they just put all the seeds in the jar, okay? But if they want to spread them out, then they put them around in the open area on their side. So what we do is we let them cache 100 seeds, and then we let the neighbor come in and steal the seeds, okay? And then we give them another 100 seeds and see, well, what do they do now that they saw that they were stolen from? So it turns out just the sight of this competitor does not cause change in behavior. So I thought maybe they could make an inference. Oh, there's another guy there. Maybe he could get my food. I should be careful. But no, they don't change their behavior until the point where they're stolen from. Okay? So they started out because of this particular species prefers spreading out the caches, the diversified version. They prefer that at first. And then after they're stolen from, this white bar pops up here in the top graph. Then they put all the seeds in the jar. Okay? So they switch their strategy in direct response to the threat of losing their seeds. And I've shown it multiple times in my experiment. And these are two different experiments on the top and the bottom. And then I mentioned the other night, the funniest thing is when they get really panicked, they don't even want to put it in their jar. They just keep it in their mouth. So it becomes very difficult to count how many seeds they cache when they're just sitting there, and they won't let them go. So I count those as larder hoards because it's all in one place. So we're interested in the degree to which this system predicts the way people behave, and I particularly study material goods because I'm interested in this drive to fill your house with crap, which everyone in America is doing at this point. So before you say, I'm not a kangaroo rat, I don't larder hoard, and okay, maybe my bank account, but nothing else, right? Your pantry is a larder, literally and figuratively, right? So you're storing food there that you don't need immediately, but you think you might need it later. And when you pack for a trip, envision going to a really safe place, a really safe country where there's no crime. I don't know what that is for you, like Singapore or something maybe. And you just keep all your cash in your wallet and you stick it in your pocket and you don't care. But then some countries, it's not quite as safe. And there's quite a lot of pickpocketing. Have you ever been to one of those countries? So I'm not going to name the country, but I went to one where it was rampant. And we would put money in like different spots. You know, so we're like scatter hoarding our cash in this dangerous place. Some is in our shoes, some we leave in the hotel, but what if they steal from our hotel? So then we put some in here, some in our bag. So it's just like a scatter hoard. So what we do in the lab is we let people have access to as many goods as they want. We let them amass stuff. And then we measure their brain responses, their emotional responses, and individual variation. So we find the same brain areas, the orbital frontal cortex, and the nucleus accumbens are active when people make decisions to acquire goods in the lab. And we use a wide variety of goods, but we don't use awesome ones because everyone wants an awesome one. I can't tell the difference between a hoarder and a regular person or somebody with strong and not strong instincts to acquire if I give you awesome stuff because everyone wants that. So I give you just regular stuff. Cotton balls, toilet paper, chocolate bar, a vase, some toothbrushes, some bananas. So just regular stuff that you find at people's house. And you find these same brain areas. And you can even predict the degree to which they report having issues with wanting a lot of stuff or getting rid of stuff is difficult in their daily life is predicted by the degree to which this inner nucleus accumbens area is active during the task. So when they see an object, it's not awesome, it's just a regular object, and their brain lights up, it's like it's saying, ooh, that's something cool, I could have that, even though it's just regular stuff. And the degree to which you show that is the degree to which you have problems at home managing. We're going to skip that. And so we measure the degree to which people vary on how many things they'll take. And we do many different types of experiments on this. And interestingly, people do the best job when they just decide instinctively. So if you just say, do you want that? Yes. Do you want that? Yes. Do you want that? No. Do you want that? No. Then people do a pretty good job. But if you leave it on the screen for a while, and for a while in psychology is 5 seconds, okay? A lot goes through your head in 5 seconds, you'd be surprised. So if you leave the banana up there for 5 seconds, they're like, no, I don't want it. Well, I mean, I guess you can always use bananas. My husband likes bananas. Okay, fine. And then they take it. So people take more stuff when you just give them 4 more seconds. And the next minute I say, look, did you change your mind? Is there anything you took that you really didn't mean to take? They regret more of those decisions, and they throw them out. And it's only your stuff, okay? So if I say, Heather here, will you go through my stuff and get rid of the junk? No problem. If you say, can you get rid of your own junk? Oh no, this isn't junk, right? So it's only your stuff that has this particular salience. And we can manipulate your emotions in the lab and show how we increase the amount of stuff you want is related to how anxious you feel, okay? Particularly uncertainty and anxiety, just like as you might find with financial decisions. So if we socially reject people in the lab, they take more stuff. So social rejection means you play a video game, you think they're real people, you're throwing a ball, they're all tossing the ball around in a circle, and then they stop throwing the ball to you, and they just throw the ball to each other, and you're just standing there for the rest of the game. Very classic way in the lab to make people feel socially rejected. And they take more stuff on the task after they do that. If we make you feel anxious, you read a story about how you're having your exams and the doctor calls and maybe there's something wrong. You got to rush over on the bus and figure out what's happening and you don't know what's going on. You take more stuff. If we make you uncertain, but you're sad, but it's an uncertain kind of sad, like somebody's sick and they might be dying, but you're not sure what it is. You don't know how serious it is. You're worried about it. You take more stuff. If you have chronic anxiety, especially with depression. So as a clinical disorder, normally we just study changing these emotions temporarily in just regular people in the lab. But sometimes we take clinical patients from the hospital, and people who have anxiety and depression have this particularly pronounced response where they want more stuff. And there's 2 different ways that we showed this. And we can even show that having chronic anxiety, feeling anxious a lot at home, even if it's not clinical, changes what kind of stuff you want. So in this experiment, we had people who had a lot of stuff, a middle level of stuff, and not very much stuff. But we took the people in the middle, because we're like, what's special about having a middle level amount of stuff, right? But you can actually divide the middling people, which is like typical average people like you and me. They don't have too much, and they're not like ascetics, right? But you can take them and divide them into populations based on what kind of stuff they take. So half of those people take pretty, beautiful, brand new, shiny things, and half of them take like Boy Scout items. So in the Boy Scout pack, there's a backpack, a flashlight, toilet paper, a granola bar, some rope. Like they literally take those items from the experiment. And you can predict the degree to which they chose those items from the amount of anxiety they feel on a daily basis. And there's a few differences between stuff and money. And I'm particularly interested in it because it's very easy to do a monetary experiment in the lab. And economists assume money is like the most important variable and it reflects your true values, right? But from my perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, money is pretty recent And so there should be some psychological differences. So we find that the amount of stuff you take is more predicted by how useful you think it is, by how valuable you think it is. Okay? So a person who has really trouble getting rid of stuff is saying, but I could make something out of that. It's still good, right? And then we do a delay discounting task, which is a classic behavioral economics experiment. Do you want $5 right now or $6 in a week? Do you want $5 in a year or $6 in a year and a week? Right? So you can see having $5 now is very salient to people compared to all the other options. So they call that delay discounting. So we tried it, but we used either money or snack food or pens. And you can see, well, you won't be able to figure this out, but I'll just tell you what it means. People who have a lot of stuff are very patient, and they'll wait the year and a week to get one more dollar. So a person who has no trouble with stuff will take the $5 now, but they don't care so much about the snack food and the pens. Whereas a person who has a lot of stuff at home is very patient waiting for the money. So they don't have a general problem with impatience. It's specific to things and consumables, including the snacks. And we have other experiments in our altruism research where you can either give money to a patient or you can sit and talk with them. And this is their real money. They got to keep the money if they didn't give it to the patients. So if it's a happy patient, you're willing to sit and talk with them and spend your time. But if it's a sad patient, you say the sad patient really needs you more, but you're not as willing to sit and talk to them, but you're more willing to just give them some money. Okay? So there's differences in the cost to you as a person in giving or keeping money versus your time. And I have a lot of research on empathy and altruism. We don't really have time to talk about it. But suffice it to say, when you're making decisions about whether to give your time, your attention, your altruistic aid, you use these same brain circuits. Okay? So this orbitofrontal cortex, the nucleus accumbens, this emotional and decision-making system is also used when you decide to help other people. And so here's an example where they show the amount that you donate to a charity scales with this nucleus accumbens activity. And then I have my own theory paper on the degree to which this emanates particularly from this neural system in the mammalian species to rescue offspring in danger. Okay? So it's not just fear of death or starvation, but also this fear that something that's vulnerable and helpless needs aid. It implicates this same neural system. And we have just one quick example. We have a lot of charities, and we manipulate the type of charity it is. Is it a heroic charity? Is it a nurturant charity? Does it seem more masculine or feminine? Is it a vague description or a specific description? And being vague doesn't help people want to donate. You should know that. You should be specific. But if there was a baby in the charity, people gave most of their money. So if you rank order all the charities, we had like 48 trials. If you rank order them by the amount of money people donate on each trial, and it's real money, they get to take it home if they don't donate it, then all the top like 15 are ones that have babies in them across all the conditions. So there's some evidence for this nurturant capacity to be very important in the evolution of our drive to help others. And we study this even in consumer preferences. So things that look like babies might look cuter. In Japanese culture, they call it kawaii. People want things that have this kawaii quality, like Hello Kitty, things that are cute, very strongly drive consumer behavior. So in conclusion, the decision-making system has evolved over hundreds of millions of years. It's strongly influenced by your emotions, particularly anxiety and uncertainty, but also this nurturant and care response. It's difficult to override, but you can override it. And money has some similarities. It relies on the same neural systems, but it has some differences from material goods and aid in ways I hope we're clear. Thank you.